Hello folks, this is Mike with Deer Park Home and Shop. Welcome to part 1 of our 3-part comprehensive video series on how to install and build the vertical drawer. Now these drawers are oftentimes called pull-out drawers or slide-out drawers for obvious reasons. You'll find these drawers in fine furniture like this in shops and in kitchens. And it's really a good way to store in a tall, narrow space. Now in part 1 today, we're going to show you how to measure for, how to plan, and how to build the drawer box itself. Okay? In part 2, we're going to show you how to lay out and install your slides and how to dock the completed drawer in the cabinet. Sounds difficult, and it can be, because these drawers usually call for 3 slides, 3 full extension slides, and there can be alignment issues, and I think it really worries people. However, in our video, we're going to show you how to use a couple of inexpensive shop-made jigs and a no math, M-A-T-H, no math method of installing these slides. So if you can use a measuring tape or a combo square, you can install a vertical drawer. In part 3, we're going to show you how to use this cabinet door as your drawer front. It creates a very nice finished appearance, as you can see. So part 2 and part 3 will not be out for a couple of weeks. So be sure to like our video and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss anything. So without further ado, let's go build a drawer. Now we promised to show you how to use your cabinet door as a drawer front. But we also recognize that this approach may not be for everyone. So you will need to consider your front treatment before you plan and build your drawer. I built this cabinet for my shop, and there are no applied drawer fronts. So you can either mount your drawer pull directly on the front of your drawer, or you can cut a handhole. Or you can simply leave your door attached to the cabinet and close it over your drawer box. Now this approach can be complicated by the type of door hinges you have. These are leaf hinges which don't protrude very far into the drawer cavity. However, if you have cup hinges, you'll want to either position your slide above or below the hinge. Cup hinges usually stick out 5/8 inches or over into your drawer space. So you will need a shim under the slide to allow the drawer to travel freely past them. Now before we start cutting wood, we need to consider a couple of things. We need to measure for our drawer, and we need to consider the layout of our slides. Now what I've done is I've got a center slide on the bottom. On one side, I've got a slide at the bottom, a slide at the top. Okay. Now there's a number of ways to lay these out. It doesn't have to be this way. This is just what I'm doing for this drawer. Other situations may require a different layout. Okay, first I'm going to measure for the depth of the drawer. So from the back wall to the very front edge of the cabinet, I've got 20 inches. Okay? So I need to leave a 1/4 inch at the back of the drawer so the drawer case won't collide with the back. Then you have to consider what kind of front you have. Now if you have a full overlay front, matter of fact, if your door's not inset at all, in my case 20 inches, I could just subtract a 1/4 for 19 3/4 inches, and that would be my depth. However, I have a inset door. In other words, 3/8 inches of the door insets into the cabinet. So I've got to subtract for that also. So that means a 1/4 inch in the back and 3/8 in the front. That's 5/8 total. So that would make my drawer depth 19 3/8 inches. So for the width, I've got 10.5 inches. I've got a 1/2 inch for this slide that I have to leave for clearance. In my case, yours may be different, of course. Then I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch on this side just to make it look balanced. I could leave less. I could leave a 1/4, an 1/8, but I don't like the way it looks, so I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch on each side. So if I do that, 10.5 minus 1/2 is an inch, so that would be 9.5 wide. And then that, I've got 27.5 inches. I've got to leave a 1/2 inch on the bottom for this. I'll leave a 1/2 inch at the bottom, at the top rather, just for balance. And so that's going to give me 26.5 inches height. So that's enough measurements to build our drawer with. So let's go do that. Now when I plan a project, I always draw out a plan, either on paper or on my CAD program. And I always make a cutting diagram. If you carefully map out your cuts, you can save on wasted material. Also plan your work to make as few cuts as possible. Here I've grouped my cuts so that I can share rips and cross cuts. I'm going to be able to get both drawers out of this one panel. Okay, let's get started. I like to make all my widest rips first. Set the rip fence depth and make all your rips of the same size in sequence. That way they will all be cut to the right width. Remember, the factory edge is usually straight, so first position it against the fence and make your cut. I usually rip the board slightly too wide, then reset the fence to the exact measurement, then turn the board around and rip off the factory edge. Hopefully we will remove any dings or damage done in handling that way. Now you'll notice we've left the guard off the saw blade, and we did that just for clarity during this video. Be sure to use all your saw's safety equipment, including your guard. You'll keep your fingers a whole lot longer that way. After we make all of our rip cuts, the next step is to make our cross cuts. Here I'm going to use a shop-made cutoff fixture to do this. So first, I set the stop at the correct measurement. Since factory cut panels are not always perfectly square, I will make a squaring cut on one end of the board, slide it down against my stop, and then cut off the other end. And repeat that for all the boards the same size. Setting a stop, as I've done here, ensures that all of your cross cuts will be exact. Also, whatever crosscut method you are using, be sure to check your cuts and make sure that they're square. If not, readjust your equipment. So after all of our pieces are cut, we dry assemble without glue or fasteners, just to make sure everything goes together as it should and that our joints are going to be tight and flush. So next we're going to join the boards. Now since this is part of a furniture project, I'm going to use biscuits to avoid visible joints. Also, number your cuts on each side of each joint. Here I'm doing that with just a light pencil mark. Each joint should have its own identifying mark. This helps greatly when you try to match them up during glue up and assembly. We're marking our locations for our biscuits now. Be sure you mark both sides of each joint. I allowed 1 3/4 inches on each edge and center the middle biscuit. I will lay out all 4 corners of the drawer before I start cutting the slots. Next we cut our biscuit slots. I went ahead and set my joiner on the number 20 biscuit setting, and I set my fence for a 3/4 inch board thickness. I'm going to cut all of the vertical cuts on the front and the backs first. Next we'll remove our clamps and get the table set up for our horizontal cuts. This will be the drawer top and bottom. After we cut all of our biscuit slots, we insert a biscuit in one side of each joint. If you have a biscuit that's too loose or too tight, don't use it. A loose joint particularly won't bond the pieces together well. Once we have our biscuits installed, we put everything together and make sure our joints are flush. Dry assemble all 4 sides. If we have a good fit all of the way around, we can start fitting the drawer side piece. Don't disassemble it just yet. If you've got a good fit, go ahead and slip your side piece into place. If it fits right, you can go ahead and mark your biscuit slots. Now you can use a measuring tape or a yardstick, but if I'm making 2 or more identical drawers, I use a story stick. I simply take a 1/4 inch slaver of plywood and make my biscuits marks on it. I'll allow a 1 3/4 to 2 inches for the edge and 3 to 4 inch spacings for the inside measurements. I just simply go around the perimeter of the board and make sure that I mark both sides of each joint. When you have all your biscuit slots marked, it's time to go ahead and disassemble everything again and cut some more slots. Now I know all of this assembly and disassembly is tedious, but believe me, the results will be worth it. After disassembly, we cut the slots for the side piece. Now when the side is complete, I move it out of the way and set up my clamps to cut the front, back, top, and bottom. Now once we have all the slots and all the pieces, guess what our next job is? Yep, you guessed it, another dry assembly. Okay, insert all of your biscuits, assemble without glue, and physically check each of your joints. Now what do you do if you have a bad joint? The repair is simple. Glue a biscuit into each side of the bad joint, let the glue dry, and cut each side flush. Now just simply recut both biscuit slots. After we have all of our biscuit joints flush, we can go ahead and check the drawer for square before we actually glue it up. We do this by measuring diagonally across the sides of the assembly. When both measurements are equal, we have a square drawer. Before I glue everything up, however, I find it much easier to drill my pinholes for the shelves. It's hard to clamp the whole jig in place after assembly. To drill the pinholes, I'm using a Biscuit brand unit from the Rockler store. A number of different manufacturers have their own version of these jigs. And of course, if you don't want to purchase a jig, you can just use a strip of pegboard, for instance. The jig is dependent on the use of a special self-centering spring-loaded bit. The bit is available in several different sizes. I always just use the 1/4 inch version. And I always mark the ends of my boards. You want to make sure that you're lining your jig up on the right end of the board. Otherwise your holes won't match up. Clamp the jig in place and determine which holes you will use for the bottom and top pegs. Here I'm going to allow about 7 inches from the bottom of the board, which was the 4th hole in the jig. Oh, by the way, the jig holes are 1 1/4 inches apart. Starting with the 4th hole, I drill my remaining holes. Notice I bob the drill up and down a bit. I find this helps clean the chips out of the peg hole. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. When we drill the last hole in the jig, we stop, unclamp, and move the jig up the board as necessary. Now my jig has 1/4 inch and 5 millimeter indexing holes. I position the 1/4 inch hole over the next to the last hole I cut and insert a 1/4 inch dowel. This locks the jig into exact position. Study your jig a second or two to determine where you need to put your indexing pin. Remember, we just need to maintain our even spacing. I clamp down the jig, and in my case, I have to make my 7-inch measurement from the top to determine my last hole. I'll go ahead and drill this hole first and work my way back down the board. Notice the row of slots on the other side of the board. This will be for our 3/4 inch inset drawer side. We will have to compensate for this 3/4 inch thickness to accurately place our holes on this side of the board. Now our holes on the front side of the board are centered a 1/2 inch from the edge. So we must measure 3/4 inches from the back and add the 1/2 inch hole spacing, or 1 1/4 inch total from the back edge. To accomplish this, I have cut a spacer and will use the inside row of jig holes. These measurements will probably vary from jig to jig. Also, your jig may have the adjustable fence that mine lacks. Now we just follow the same procedure to cut our holes as we used on the front edge of the board. Each end of my jig is actually a mirror image of the other. So all I have to do is turn it around 180 degrees and clamp it to the board. Be mindful though of the orientation notes that you scribbled on the bottom of the board so you can make sure that you're clamping your jig in the right place. When all of our pinholes are drilled, guess what? I'll do another dry assembly to make sure I like the way everything turned out. Then I disassemble again. Also, before disassembly, I took measurements to fit the shelves. To do this, I use measuring sticks. Now this is simply 2 flat sticks sandwiched together and expanded until each stick touches the front and back surfaces of the drawer. Then they are simply clamped together. They can then be taken to the miter saw, set a stop, and cut the shelf. Notice I first made a squaring cut, and then I made my final cut with the shelf against the stop. If you need adjustable shelves like mine, simply cut the shelf length about 1/8 inch short. The best time to cut your handhole is before glue up and assembly. Now if you don't plan to cut a handhole, just go ahead and skip forward to the next section of the video. The first thing we have to do is cut out a simple jig. I took a scrap of plywood and I glued 1x2 strips to it. The slot should be at least 3.5 inches long to allow for the width of your hand. The depth of the recess is 1 inch, so I simply ripped off the excess to get the correct depth. My jig is 7 inches by 10.5 inches long overall. Be sure to make your jig big enough that the clamps won't interfere with the travel of the router. The next step is to use your jig to make a pencil outline of the cut. Since the router cannot make a square cut in an inside corner, we'll use a quarter or a medium-sized washer to add arcs to the outline. Now we'll use our saber saw to cut out the outline, but instead of cutting right on the line, cut about 1/8 inch inside it, so that when you finish, the entire line will still be showing. By cutting away this excess, the router will be able to follow the jig easier, and it will make a cleaner cut with minimal splintering and gouging. My favorite bit for jig work is the flush trim bit. Now it's available in either 1/4 or 1/2 inch shank sizes. It features this bearing that rides against the jig surface. Note that the carbide flutes are even with the rim of the bearing. This bearing will not allow the bit to cut any deeper into your workpiece than the cutting guide itself. Now secure your workpiece to the table and clamp your jig in place, and make sure the jig is flush with the edges of the workpiece. Now you can make your cut. Keep the router moving to avoid burn marks. Inspect your joint and sand if necessary. Now some people might go ahead and glue everything up here and then try to sand and finish. I think it's much easier to do this with the case disassembled. I usually sand and finish the inside ports of the drawer first. It's difficult to navigate sandpaper and finish applicators around the edges and corners of an assembled drawer. I end up with runs or thick and thin spots. First I sand all the inside ports with coarse, medium, and then fine sandpaper. And before my last sanding, I dampen the surfaces with water to raise the grain, and then fine sand when dry. Next I tape off my joints with blue painter's tape to protect the areas that we're going to glue. Instead of covering the whole 3/4 inches of joint surface with tape, I leave 1/16 to 1/8 inch along the edges bordering the finish. Doing so ensures that there are no finish gaps visible when we glue it all up. After sanding, I brush off the sawdust and then use a tack cloth to remove any remaining dust residue. Next I finish my project with 2 to 3 coats of varnish. I buff between coats with a refinishing pad to remove any rough spots. I use semi-gloss interior polyurethane in this case. After sanding and finishing, we can remove the blue tape and glue up the drawer. I usually use the yellow Titebond glue, that is if I can work fairly fast. Yellow glue has a shorter open time than white glue, so if it's a time-consuming glue up like this one, I just go ahead and use the white. Projects I built with it 20 or 30 years ago are still together, so it's not a bad option. Either squeeze the glue in the slots or coat the bottom half of the biscuit with a brush as I'm doing here. When the biscuits are all inserted into the slots, you can then coat the exposed sides and then assemble. Remember that once your glue sets up, any mistake you may have made is locked in permanently. So make sure your joints are tight and your corners are flush. Once it's together, take your measuring tape and make sure it's squared up. The next step would be to clamp it together. Leave the clamps in place for at least an hour to allow the glue to dry. Next, sand the exterior surfaces with coarse, medium, and fine sandpaper, and then apply 3 coats of varnish. Now we'll let our varnish dry overnight, and then we can go ahead and install our slides. Of course, the problem with that is that slide installation doesn't come up until part 2 of this series, so be sure to watch for it. In that series, we will install slides both on the face frame cabinet we've worked on today and also on a frameless cabinet. In addition, I will be doing a video review of the DeWalt DWS 779 12-inch sliding miter saw. Glad I got that out. Anyway, be sure to watch for that. I've had the saw about 3 months now, and I'll be giving you my user impressions, and we'll be comparing that saw to the model 780, which is the next step up. So be sure to like our video and be sure to subscribe to our channel. And until later, thanks for watching.